Hello Steelers, and welcome to this review of the Panzers of Prokhorovka. This is a new history of the famous Soviet victory over the German Second SS Panzer Corps on the 12th of July 1943, fighting during the Battle of Kursk. This has long been seen as the biggest tank battle in history. Also, lots of myths have arisen around this actual battle as well, and this book absolutely sets out to completely demolish those. First of all, this is written by Dr. Ben Wheatley. I think this is probably based on his doctoral thesis, actually, just the way it's written and the way that, you know, there's so much in here. I think this is probably a rework of his PhD thesis for a wider audience. The current price in the book is £25. Not including postage, of course. This is the hardback version. It's literally only just been released, and as I'm recording this, it was only released a week ago. So I'll probably tell you how soon after this it was released. I actually sat down and read this in 2 days because it was so good and so interesting and fascinating. I've long had an interest in the Eastern Front, long had an interest in the tank battles around Kursk in particular. It's a massive titanic struggle between the Red Army and the Wehrmacht, including SS divisions as well, and really was the high watermark of the German army in the Second World War. I mean, arguably they'd already lost the war by 1943 anyway. This book readdresses some of the claims that were made by the Soviets immediately after the war, particularly by the commander, Rossitsky. I can't pronounce his name, but he, basically the 5th Guard Army commander, their tanks were practically destroyed on the battlefield, but they were able to refit very quickly afterwards. It was one of the reasons why they had such success after the Battle of Kursk and Prokhorovka itself. But in explaining his failures to Stalin, the commander of 5th Guard Army actually said that they destroyed 300 German tanks in the process of losing their own tanks. This myth now is still being touted about. It is still being said. However, you know, back in the I think in the 90s, a German historian said that there was no more than 33 German tanks destroyed at Prokhorovka, or during Citadel at least. And Ben Wheatley has actually found that there were no more than 16 tanks lost at Prokhorovka by the 2nd SS Tank Corps, which consisted of SS Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, SS Das Reich, and also SS Totenkopf as well, the three operated together under a special unit, basically, that wasn't similar to a normal corps, but had an expanded table of organisation and equipment. So, what is this book about? Basically, Ben has found the Motor Transport Office records for the 4th Panzer Army, but also, and has examined those in great detail to look at the tank losses for each day, because the engineer would have been in charge of writing off tanks or sending them off to various workshops to get repaired. However, he also, as well back in 2020, found the missing MTO records, which are presumably a lot of people thought had been destroyed because the myth of the loss of German tanks. These had thought to be destroyed. However, they weren't in 4th Panzer Army's archives. They're actually in 6th Panzer Army's archives, and have been classified until relatively recently. So in 2020, Ben was able to access these and then do an actual statistical breakdown of the amount of tanks that Leibstandarte in particular, who bore the brunt of the fighting at Prokhorovka, and looked at where their losses, their daily returns. In the German army, as in most armies, you have an engineer or chief motor officers who basically transport officers who will record how many vehicles they have, so they know, and they create these reports. These were done in 10-day reports in the German army, and there are some that cover the Prokhorovka battle, and the Battle of Kursk, and these are the ones that you can look at to work out exactly what kind of tanks have been are operational, and also which ones are in various workshops. And as I say, there were workshops in the close to the front line, but there are also workshops in the homeland. Some of these were sent home for extra repairs, where I think it took over 4 or 6 days to repair them. They'd be sent back to the homeland, but then they would also then be sent back to the parent units that owned the tanks in the first place. So this is a really good indication of which tanks are operational, which tanks are being repaired. You can kind of work out from that which ones have been badly damaged on the battlefield or claimed as kills. And in this, the Russians claimed, I think the Russians claimed 55 Tigers have been destroyed during the Battle of Prokhorovka. Turns out there was possibly only one that was even recovered after the fighting anyway, because the Germans kept possession of the battlefield at least, and it may have been recovered a couple of days after the battlefield before the Soviets attacked again and captured and pushed the Germans back. So this is a really important book. Simply because it's destroying myths that people have held on to for a long time. You know, it keeps coming up in historical documentaries, in historical books, that the German army, the German Panzer armies were absolutely mullered at Prokhorovka, and the SS were just unable to fight pretty much after that. Really, this is not the case. SS Liebstandarte were taken off to Italy in the immediate aftermath of Citadel, which ended only a couple of days after Prokhorovka anyway. And then they spread their tanks around to the other two, Das Reich and Totenkopf, straight afterwards. So they just disappeared off to Italy to shore up the Italians, and then they were brought back again to the Eastern Front later on. And this severely weakened them, simply because they just didn't have all the spare parts for the tanks that they had damaged, and also basically just messed them about. So you know, Hitler's meddling there really led to the downfall of what you could argue were, you know, some of his best equipped troops, if not the best troops in terms of training and usefulness. But yeah, I mean, these were really good at the time, 1943, probably at their peak of being some of the best troops, or the best corps that Hitler had, and he basically squandered them. This book talks about that, talks about those issues afterwards. What it does do, as I say, it's really interesting because it talks about the daily returns, or at least the weekly returns from the engineers and from the transport officers and their reports, and it goes into real depth. I mean, if you want numbers, and if you want to see the daily returns and lots of tables, then this is the book for you. And for me, I found it absolutely fascinating. I mean, he's even gone in as far as tracing the individual chassis numbers for various tanks, and there are pages and pages of each tank detailed as to where they are, where they end up, what happens to them. You know, do they basically follow the divisions through their fighting over the next couple of years? And some of them do. Quite a few of them do. The Prokhorovka tanks go from Citadel all the way through to the fighting around Kharkov, and then also later the Soviet clearance of Ukraine and the German army's retreat to the Dnieper River as well. And these battles are also covered in this book as well. So that kind of gives you a pretty good background idea of the book itself, and you know what you expect from this. And I think it is this kind of stuff that I really like. I like myth busting, especially when it comes to historical myths. I think it's worthwhile doing reappraising and looking at these things that we kind of hold quite dear, I think, and it really teaches you something, that you know, history is not just this. It's not just a block of facts. There are things that can change. There are new interpretations. There's always new things to find out, and exactly that. You know, nearly 80 years after the battle, enough information has come up to actually refine completely how many tanks were lost at this particular battle, and this is a really deep dive into that, and it's a fantastic example of how history should be done. and also just how meticulous the research should be as well when you are looking at history, at least for publishing that kind of thing. And I think this is an exemplary example of that kind of work, scholarly, but also incredibly accessible as well by by the layman as well. I know a little bit about the Eastern Front, but I was learning a lot more about it just by reading this. I was even reading about the logistics of the German army in the Second World War. For example, the fact that the tanks were given different classifications depending on how badly damaged they were in the field, and where that then decided where they were sent. Now, one of the things that he does mention in this, and something that I'm going to mention here, is that the transport office records and the engineer records aren't always perfect. Of course, they're not. I mean, they are a primary source, but you also have to take them a little bit as well with a pinch of salt. And that again is what is proven in this book, is the fact that he's actually gone through, sat down, and worked out where tanks have been classified as being sent home actually weren't. They were still retained on the books, and they were repaired closer to the front line, or possibly not even repaired at all. For example, there's a Liebestandarte Tiger that went into a river, should have been sent home from homeland maintenance. It was signed off as such, but actually turns up again still in their inventory in the next ones, in the next reports. So it just shows you, these things are, although there are certain protocols that they're supposed to be following within the army and within within the tank corps themselves and the repair workshops, these things just aren't being adhered to. So the book absolutely covers the battles following, as I mentioned already, following Prokhorovka. So it includes the battles for Kharkov and also for Kiev, and then also the fall back to the Dnieper. And it kind of ends really at the start of 1944, when there is a lull in the fighting on the Eastern Front until Operation Bagration in July of 44, which pushes the German army all the way back to the lines of the Reich. What else I like about this book, and this is from an archaeological point of view, is there is a ton of aerial photography and also interpretation of those aerial photographs, because he also found as well aerial photos of the battlefield itself of Prokhorovka immediately after the fighting. He was able to identify on there 3 Panzer IVs that had been knocked out as part of that fighting, as part of those 16 tanks, and the dozens and scores of Soviet tanks that were destroyed in their desperate attack down this really tiny corridor up against basically against an anti-tank ditch that was defended by German tanks and packs. And I love that kind of stuff. As an archaeologist, I'm really interested in aerial photography. I mean, it's one of the big things that we use as archaeologists. Also, as well, from Google Earth, he's actually traced some of the actual original battlefields as well, matching them up to original aerial photos. There's a couple of Soviet aerial photos that he was able to get his hands onto as well. And again, I love that kind of thing. I really love, then and now photographs and a comparison of how things are. So photographs of the anti-tank ditch that were taken by one of the SS official photographers, and he's found the places as well on Google Earth and been able to match those up. Fantastic stuff. I love that, really love it. So from an archaeological point of view, it's really interesting to see those sites as they are today, how much has changed, and the fact that you can actually go onto Google Earth and look them up. And I did as soon as I'd finished reading this, because it was just so interesting. For a wargaming point of view, obviously it's a wargaming channel, so what's the point of reading this from a wargaming point of view? It's it's a very deep dive into a very small subject. As I say, from one point of view, it smashes that myth that the German armour was absolutely mullered during the Battle of Prokhorovka. It completely wipes that out, no question about it. Also, because you've got the table of equipment, organisation and equipment throughout these, and those returns of tanks as well, every one of these is listed, explaining exactly how many tanks are left in each of the divisions at the time, those 3 divisions. It's a real eye-opener from a wargaming point of view that they just have a real mishmash of numbers of vehicles within those within their organisations. So although wargamers are desperate to and love to publish lists, an army list, it basically just shows you that you could pretty much make it up and you'd still be right. You know, you might only have 17 Panzer IVs when you're supposed to have 45 or whatever. You know, a company is made up of instead of 30 tanks, it's made up of, I don't know what, 3, 4, depending on the situation. So really, any organisation is pretty much correct, and I think that's really good, and it's well worth, as I say, it's well worth it just for that. It also has as well some really good tables towards the end, just of vehicles, manpower losses by the German army. So you've got some good data on that as well. Some really good, you know, how much equipment was lost by the German army as well, so that is very useful. And as I say, I think it's really down to, you know, so 3rd Panzer Corps, for example, we got the 6th Panzer AFV strength during July 43, so it just tells us what we've got: Panzer 3s, Panzer 4s, Flam Panzers, Panzer 6s, Befehl Panzers, the command tanks, and then the total. So for example, on the inventory of the 30th of June 1943, the 3rd Panzer Corps has 52 Panzer 3s, 32 Panzer 4s, 14 Flame Panzers, no Panthers obviously at that point, 6 command tanks, for a total of 104 Panthers. And then operational, by the 30th of the 6th, 1944, we've got 95. So, you know, the inventory is 104, actually operational is 95. So it just shows you what they've got on their inventory and what is actually in the field or able to operate. So I think that's a really good thing from a wargamer's point of view. It's just to have a think about when you're making lists, or when you're putting together army lists. And if you wanted to, you could completely recreate the entire Panzer the 2nd SS Panzer Corps, just from the data in here in mid-June of 1943. I would say 100% definitely get this book. I think it's really good. It's really interesting. It takes you from literally from the high point of the Panzer Corps on at Prokhorovka, although it's a Soviet victory, all the way through to the final decimation of them on the Eastern Front in early 44. And there's a real slump. It's interesting to see the numbers of tanks that are just getting destroyed continually after 1943, or mid-1943 at least, to the back end of 43, as the German army is on the retreat. The reason for that is because they are obviously not in control of that battlefield anymore, so they are losing those tanks to the enemy as the enemy are moving in. If you're in control of a battlefield, you can recover tanks. So this just becomes this perpetual problem, and also the fact that the Soviets are just able to absolutely ram in as many tanks as they can into their large-scale attacks, especially in the south as well in 43. Yeah, terrific stuff. I mean, it is, as I say, it's really turned what we think about the Battle of Prokhorovka on its head, and I think it is well worth it just for reading, just for somebody who's got even a slight interest in the fighting on the Eastern Front, because it is also, it's mind-boggling when you look at the number of soldiers and tanks and things that were involved. So for example, I think there's about 1.2 million Soviet soldiers attacking in the south of 1943. Just massive numbers when you think that D-Day, for example, there was 156,000 Allied soldiers that landed on the beaches. Yet that gets far more coverage than the clearing of the Germans back to the Dnieper in 43. You know, just shows you the vast scale of the fighting on the Eastern Front, if nothing else. I definitely think it's worth it. As a wargamer, also as a historian, as a really good piece of historical text, and just as a myth-busting book, if nothing else. So, I'd say go and check it out. I shall put a link to it, an Amazon affiliate link, in the description down below, which will give me a little bit of money if you actually buy anything through that link. You don't have to, of course, but it's there for you if you want to. And I'll say thank you very much for watching this review. I hope you've enjoyed it. I really enjoyed this book, and I hope that's come across at least, and I think hopefully I will see you in the next Storm of Steel video.